The hum of the server room was a constant, a low thrum that had long since burrowed into the marrow of my bones. It was a sound I'd once found comforting, the pulse of knowledge, the relentless march of data. Now it just sounded like a dying machine, much like myself. I, Dean, astrophysicist, or what was left of one. My name felt like a relic, a tag for a person I no longer recognized. The universe I'd once gazed at with wonder had become a canvas of cold, indifferent equations. My office, a sterile box overlooking a smog-choked city, offered no solace. The framed photograph on my desk, a younger me, beaming under a sky thick with stars, holding a battered telescope, felt like a cruel joke. That spark, that insatiable curiosity, had been ground down by years of grant proposals, committee meetings, and the crushing weight of irrelevance. My current project, if I could call it that, was a monument to futility, sifting through decades of archived deep space radio telescope data. A digital graveyard, really. Most of it was noise, the cosmic equivalent of static on a broken radio. The occasional pulsar, the distant whisper of a quasar, nothing new, nothing that hadn't been catalogued 1,000 times before. I was supposed to be looking for anomalies, deviations from the expected patterns. But after all this time, I'd learned that the universe was remarkably good at being predictable, and I was even better at being bored. Tonight, the air in the data center was particularly thick, heavy with the recycled breath of 1,000 processors. I ran a hand over my tired eyes, the grit of exhaustion, a familiar sensation. The coffee I'd chugged an hour ago had curdled in my stomach, doing little to sharpen my focus. I was just going through the motions, a ghost haunting the digital halls of scientific inquiry. Then it happened. A flicker, a ripple in the sea of data. It was subtle, barely a blip on the radar. My eyes, accustomed to the monotonous flow of information, caught it. A pattern, not just any pattern, but one that defied explanation. It wasn't the rhythmic pulse of a pulsar, nor the broadband hiss of galactic noise. This was structured, deliberate. My heart gave a little lurch, a sensation I hadn't felt in years. It was a faint tremor, a distant echo of the passion that had once defined me. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath catching in my throat. The signal was weak, buried deep within a sector of space designated as empty. Sector 7G. No stars, no galaxies, no nebulae, just emptiness. I ran the analysis again and again. Each time the same result. A coherent, non-random signal originating from a place that should have been silent. My fingers, suddenly nimble, flew across the keyboard. I cross-referenced with other datasets, other observatories. Nothing. It was as if this signal existed in its own isolated pocket of reality, unheard, unseen until now. This wasn't just an anomaly, it felt like a deliberate intrusion. I zoomed in on the source coordinates, my gaze fixed on the sterile, black expanse displayed on the screen. I had pored over these charts for years, memorizing their emptiness, a complete and utter null. But the signal persisted, a faint, insistent hum beneath the static. It was like finding a single, perfect snowflake on a sun-baked desert, impossible, illogical yet undeniably present. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, the sensation of being watched, though I knew I was utterly alone. I pulled up the mission logs for the telescopes that had scanned this sector. Decades of data, meticulously catalogued. And then I found it. It spoke of a clandestine operation, a listening post established in a remote, undisclosed location. The words sent a shiver down my spine. Why had this information been classified, and what had happened to the people who had manned this post? The signal from Sector 7G wasn't just a new discovery, it was a key to something ancient, something hidden, and it was coming from a place that shouldn't exist. The mundane reality of my life, with its predictable disappointments, was dissolving, replaced by a gnawing unease. What was out there in that silent, empty sector of space, and why was it suddenly singing? I, Dean, astrophysicist, or whatever I was now, was staring at a screen that refused to behave. The anomalous signal, the one that had pulled me from my comfortable apathy, was still there. Faint, but undeniably present, like a phantom limb twitching in the void. I'd retreated to the Cold War bunker, occupants vanished. Recordings remain after the university decided my obsessive focus on a ghost in the cosmic static was, to put it mildly, unproductive. They'd offered me early retirement. I'd taken it, along with the keys to this forgotten mausoleum of fear. It was supposed to be quiet, a place to lick my wounds and maybe, just maybe, prove I wasn't losing my mind. Turns out the universe had other plans. This signal, it wasn't just a frequency, it was structured. Not like any natural phenomenon I'd ever encountered. Nothing, absolutely nothing matched. It was as if the signal was being broadcast from a place that shouldn't exist. The air in the bunker was perpetually cool, carrying the faint, metallic tang of ancient machinery and something else, something like damp earth. It clung to my clothes, to my skin. I'd rigged up a makeshift lab in one of the auxiliary control rooms, surrounded by dusty maps of missile trajectories and faded posters depicting mushroom clouds. A fitting backdrop for what I was uncovering, I supposed. I leaned closer to the monitor, the glow reflecting in my tired eyes. The signal had a peculiar waveform, almost organic in its fluctuations, yet impossibly precise. It pulsed with a rhythm that defied any known physical constant. I'd run simulations, trying to replicate it with known astrophysical processes. All failed. The signal remained stubbornly unique, an outlier in the grand cosmic equation. My fingers, stiff from hours of typing, hovered over the keyboard. I needed to isolate it, to strip away the background noise, the cosmic microwave background radiation, the faint echoes of the Big Bang itself. It was like trying to hear a whisper in a hurricane, but I was determined. This was more than just a scientific curiosity now. It felt important, like a message or a warning. I reran the filtering algorithms, tweaking the parameters with a surgeon's precision. The hum of the servers seemed to deepen, a guttural growl that vibrated through the concrete floor. My stomach clenched. There was a growing unease that had nothing to do with the signal itself and everything to do with the atmosphere of this place. What had happened to them? Why had they abandoned this place, leaving behind only their spectral recordings? The screen flickered. A new pattern emerged from the static, sharper, more defined. It wasn't just a waveform anymore. There were shapes, geometric, impassable. They shifted, coalesced, then dissolved, too fast for my eyes to fully track, but the impression was undeniable. It was like watching a language being spoken, a language of pure, abstract form. My breath hitched. My heart, which I'd thought incapable of anything more than a weary thud, gave a sharp, unwelcome jolt. This wasn't natural. No natural process could generate such intricate, non-random patterns. It was deliberate. That's when the intercom crackled to life, a burst of static that made me jump. "Dean, you in there?" It was the caretaker, a gruff man named Arthur, who was the only other soul who knew about this place. He was supposed to be a groundskeeper, a quiet presence who kept the weeds from reclaiming the concrete. He'd never shown much interest in my work or my presence. I cleared my throat, my voice rough from disuse. "Arthur, yeah, I'm here. Heard you got the auxiliary power running. You sure you know what you're doing down there? This old place, it's got its quirks." His voice was laced with a weariness that mirrored my own, but also something else, a hint of apprehension. "Just running some diagnostics, Arthur, nothing to worry about." I tried to keep my tone light, but the tremor in my hands betrayed me. "Diagnostics, huh?" Heard funny noises coming from this sector, like static, but I looked back at the screen, at the impossible geometry dancing in the digital ether. It was seeping in from somewhere else, somewhere vast and unknown. What had Arthur heard? The hum of the servers was a low thrum against my teeth. It vibrated through the concrete floor, a constant companion in this forgotten tomb. Arthur's recording had ended abruptly, the static a jarring punctuation mark to his descent into whatever that was. I replayed the last few seconds, the garbled words, the rising panic in his voice. It was useless. The signal itself was the only clue, and it was still there, a stubborn, rhythmic presence on my monitors. I pushed away from the console, the worn leather of the chair creaking in protest. The air in the Cold War bunker occupants vanished, recordings remain was stale, thick with the scent of dust and old metal. My breath hitched. It had been days since I'd fully registered the smell, days since I'd last seen sunlight. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe in my peripheral vision. I told myself it was just the uneven power, the failing infrastructure of this place. That was different. It had started subtly, a prickle on my arms, and now it felt like a shroud. Arthur had mentioned it too, hadn't he? I turned back to the primary display. The signal. It was more than just a sequence of pulses. As I zoomed in, isolating specific data packets, I saw it. Not random noise, but structure. Intricate, impossibly complex patterns that defied any known linguistic or mathematical framework. It was like looking at a map of a city built by impossible geometries, a place that shouldn't exist. I ran decryption algorithms, pattern recognition software, anything I could think of. Hours bled into each other, marked only by the shifting patterns on the screens and the gnawing in my gut. The bunker's isolation was a double-edged sword. Then, a breakthrough, a recurring motif, a sequence that repeated with subtle variations. It wasn't a message in the traditional sense, but a key, a Rosetta Stone for this alien dialect. I focused, my entire being narrowing to the glowing lines on the monitor. The variations weren't random. They were positional, like coordinates, but not coordinates in our three-dimensional space. These were angular, rotational, as if the signal was describing not a place, but a state of being, a specific orientation in something vast and unknowable. I started plotting them, translating the rotational shifts into a spatial representation. The bunker's outdated mapping software struggled, the lines warping, twisting, refusing to resolve into anything familiar. It was like trying to draw a circle on a piece of paper that kept bending and folding in on itself. My breath hitched again. It felt like a pressure, a weight pressing in from all sides. I could almost feel them watching. I pushed the thought away. Focus. An area of space that, according to every catalog, every survey, was empty, absolutely devoid of stars, nebulae, anything. Yet this signal, this impossibly complex thing, was coming from there. I fed the derived coordinates into a deep space simulation program. It churned, the processors groaning under the strain. The projected star charts flickered. Empty space. Then a ripple, a distortion, not a celestial body but a disturbance, a place where space itself seemed wrong, twisted, like a tear in reality. My hands trembled, the light from the monitors reflected in my wide eyes. The signal wasn't just a message, it was a beacon, a marker, and it was pointing to something. A low, scraping sound echoed from the far end of the bunker. I froze, my head snapping up. It was faint, almost imperceptible, lost in the drone of the machinery. I held my breath, straining to hear. My own breathing sounded impossibly loud. It was just the building settling, old, decaying, that's all it was. It was no longer just a feeling. It was a physical presence. I could feel it on my skin like 1,000 tiny needles. The signal pulsed, a rhythmic invitation. It was a map, yes, but not a map of where to go. It was a map of what was there, and what was there, it wasn't empty space. It was something else entirely, something that was making space empty by consuming it. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer flickered at the edge of my vision, near the entrance to the main control room. I blinked, and it was gone. But the impression remained a fleeting glimpse of something that didn't belong. Something that moved with an impossible grace, a fluidity that defied the solid concrete walls. There was I seeing things, there was the isolation finally getting to me, or was Arthur's fate somehow contagious, and why was it singing, whatever that was? I replayed the last few seconds, the garbled whispers, the frantic scraping sounds, nothing, just the hiss of dead air. I pushed myself away from the console, the worn leather of the chair creaking in protest. My own breath felt too loud in the cavernous space of the Cold War bunker. Occupants vanished, recordings remain. The air, stagnant and cool, carried the faint, metallic tang of old machinery and something else, something I couldn't quite place. A faint, earthy smell like damp soil after a heavy rain, but wrong, too deep, too mineral. My gaze drifted to the monitors. They flickered, displaying static patterns that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. Arthur had said the signal wasn't just in the data, it was doing something, affecting the equipment, affecting him. I ran a diagnostic, my fingers flying across the keyboard, the clack of the keys echoing unnervingly. No errors, no anomalies flagged. Yet the static on the screen seemed to coalesce, forming fleeting shapes that dissolved before I could properly focus. Were they there? Or was it just my eyes playing tricks in the dim, utilitarian light? I looked at my hands, they were steady. My heart, though, felt like a trapped bird beating against my ribs. I told myself it was the isolation, the lingering unease from Arthur's recording. This place was designed to disorient, to instill paranoia. Of course it was getting to me. I stood, pacing the small area in front of the consoles. Arthur's final transmission had been from deep within the bunker, from the sub-basement levels. He'd been searching for the source of the signal, the nexus. He'd believed it was something tangible, something that could be contained. But the readings, the sheer otherness of the anomaly, it suggested otherwise. It suggested something that didn't obey the rules of our reality. The earthy smell intensified, becoming almost cloying. I took a cautious step towards the reinforced steel door that led deeper into the bunker. It was sealed shut, a thick bolt mechanism indicating it hadn't been opened in decades. Arthur's recordings had indicated he'd bypassed it, or that it had opened for him. How? I placed my hand on the cold metal. It felt unnaturally smooth, almost polished despite its age. A faint vibration far subtler than the server hum pulsed beneath my fingertips. It was a rhythmic throb like a slow, massive heartbeat. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a signal anymore. It was present. It was here. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Geothermal activity, unlikely given the bunker's construction. A structural resonance, possible, but it felt too organic, too deliberate. Arthur's voice, strained and breathless, echoed in my memory. It's not just listening, Dean, it's breathing. I pulled my hand back, a tremor running through my arm. The static on the monitors seemed to intensify, the patterns becoming more defined, more disturbing. I saw what looked like vast, swirling nebulae. Not the familiar star fields I knew, but something alien, chaotic, and within them shapes that defied geometry, impossible angles that made my head ache. A low, guttural sound, like stones grinding together, emanated from beyond the steel door. It wasn't loud, but it was deep, resonating in my bones. I froze, straining my ears. It came again, a slow, deliberate scrape. This was beyond anything I'd prepared for. Arthur hadn't just found a signal. He'd found a door, and whatever was on the other side was now pushing through. My instinct screamed at me to run, to scramble back to the surface, to the familiar world of sunlight and predictable physics. But the scientist in me, the part that had dedicated its life to understanding the universe, was rooted to the spot. This was the ultimate discovery, a truth so profound, so terrifying, it could shatter everything we thought we knew. The anomaly wasn't just in space, it was here. In this forgotten bunker, in this very room. I looked at the steel door, then at the flickering monitors. The choice was stark. Flee and live with the gnawing uncertainty, the knowledge that I had turned my back on the greatest mystery humanity had ever encountered. The earthy smell was overwhelming now, thick and suffocating. The rhythmic pulsing against the door seemed to quicken, a silent invitation. I took a deep, shaky breath, the stale air burning my lungs. What was Arthur's final discovery? The air in the Cold War bunker, occupants vanished, recordings remain, was thick with a silence that pressed in on my eardrums. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a heavy, expectant stillness, like the moment before a thunderclap. My fingers still tingled from the phantom touch of the console, a coldness that had nothing to do with the bunker's chilled concrete. The swirling patterns on the screens, once just abstract noise, now held a terrifying coherence. They were windows. I realized with a sickening lurch, not into space, but into between spaces. I moved deeper into the bunker, my footsteps echoing unnervingly. Dust motes danced in the weak beam of my flashlight, the only illumination apart from the eerie glow of the dormant monitors. The previous occupants had left in a hurry. Papers were scattered across a metal desk, charts and graphs depicting complex wave patterns, their annotations growing increasingly frantic. I picked up a logbook. Its pages brittle with age. It's not random. There's a rhythm, a deliberate cadence. We've tried to decipher it, but it defies all known linguistic structures. It's older than language. My own hands began to shake. Older than language. The implications were enormous. This wasn't just an alien broadcast. It was something fundamental, something that predated our very understanding of communication. The patterns on the screens seemed to shift again, coalescing into shapes that hinted at impossible geometries, angles that shouldn't exist in 3 dimensions. They pulsed with a faint, internal light, a sickly violet that seemed to leach the color from everything else in the room. I found a reel-to-reel tape player, a relic of a bygone era, and several spools of magnetic tape. The reels began to turn with a low whir. For a moment, there was only the hiss of static. Then, a sound began to emerge. It was a deep, resonant tone. Not quite a hum, not quite a growl. It vibrated in my bones, a physical presence in the suffocating air. As the tone deepened, a new layer emerged, a series of clicks and whistles, impossibly rapid, impossibly complex. They weren't sounds I could process. They felt like intrusions, like thoughts being forced into my skull. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The patterns on the screens intensified, mirroring the sonic assault. I saw the shapes again, clearer now. And they were not nebulae. They were vast, intricate structures, impossibly intricate, like the skeletal remains of some colossal cosmic beast. The logbook fell from my numb fingers, pages fluttering to the floor. I flipped through it frantically, searching for answers, for any hint of what these people had discovered, what they had seen. It is remembering us, and its memory is hungry, hungry. The word echoed the gnawing emptiness I felt in my gut. The sound from the tape player seemed to coalesce, forming a single, impossibly long, drawn-out note that vibrated with an almost sentient malevolence. The violet light from the screens pulsed in time with it. I could feel a pressure building behind my eyes, a dizzying disorientation. The concrete walls of the bunker seemed to ripple, to stretch, as if reality itself was thinning. I had to understand. I had to know what this entity was, what it wanted. Was it an intelligence, a force of nature, or something else entirely, something that existed beyond our limited definitions? I fumbled for the remaining tapes, my fingers clumsy, desperate, my teeth chattered. I found another entry in the logbook near the end, almost illegible. The signal isn't a message, it's a scar, and it's spreading. A scar. What kind of scar? A scar on what? On space? On time? On us? The patterns on the screens now filled every available surface, a dizzying, nauseating kaleidoscope of impossible forms. I felt a primal urge to flee, to run from this place, from this sound, from this encroaching, alien awareness. But my feet were rooted to the spot, my gaze locked on the unfolding horror. The clicks and whistles from the tape player intensified, weaving a complex tapestry of sound that felt like it was unraveling my sanity, thread by agonizing thread. What was it trying to communicate, or was it simply being? The air in the Cold War bunker, occupants vanished, recordings remain, was a stagnant soup. It clung to my skin, a damp metallic chill that had nothing to do with the climate control, which still hummed with a ghostly efficiency. The scar, not a physical wound, not as I understood them. This was something else, something etched into the very structure of existence. The screens, once a chaotic symphony of data, had resolved into a single terrifying image. It pulsed, a slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction that made my stomach clench. It wasn't a visual representation of anything I'd ever studied. No spectral lines, no Doppler shifts, no gravitational lensing. It was a feeling made manifest, a visual ache. The patterns weren't random. They were forming, coalescing like ink blooming in water, but with a terrifying precision. Each pulse sent a faint vibration through the concrete floor, a low thrum that I felt more in my bones than heard. My fingers, clumsy and numb, traced the edges of the console. The data streams that had led me here, to this desolate monument to forgotten anxieties, were now secondary. The primary source was this thing on the screen. This was a roar. I remembered the initial exhilaration, the thrill of discovery. I'd thought I was on the cusp of a new understanding of the universe, a paradigm shift. This wasn't discovery, it was an intrusion. The hum of the bunker's machinery seemed to deepen, to take on a resonant quality that vibrated in my teeth. A sound, or perhaps a sensation, like the tearing of vast, unseen fabric. I scrambled back, my chair scraping against the concrete. My eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on the central screen. The pulsing image seemed to be growing, not just on the screen, but in my perception. It was as if the bunker itself was being consumed by it, the walls thinning, the air thinning, the very substance of reality fraying at the edges. My own body felt alien. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. My hands were slick with sweat, and a tremor ran through my legs. I could feel it, a growing pressure behind my eyes, a distortion of my vision. The edges of the console seemed to warp, to shimmer. The recordings. I'd been so focused on the live feed, on the immediate threat. But the recordings held the history of this place, the echoes of the people who had once inhabited this tomb. They had seen this before. They had felt this before. My gaze snapped to the banks of older monitors, the ones that had been displaying the historical data. But the faint scent of ozone, sharp and acrid, lingered in the air. Had they been overloaded, or had something erased them? It wasn't coming from any speaker. It was inside my head, a rasping, ancient sound that spoke of eons of patient, hungry waiting. It was the sound of the scar widening. The pulsing on the main screen intensified, each beat now accompanied by that tearing sound, louder, more insistent. The concrete floor beneath my feet vibrated with a new intensity, a deep, resonant tremor that threatened to shake the bunker apart. Dust rained down from the ceiling, fine particles that caught the harsh light like falling stars. What was this entity? It was not alive, not in any way I understood life. It was the cosmic equivalent of a disease, a malignancy spreading through the universe. And the signal, the scar, were its tendrils reaching out, grasping, pulling. I looked at the console, at the array of buttons and switches. There had to be a way to stop it. The data was gone. The recordings were silent. I was alone with this cosmic rot. My mind raced, a desperate scramble for a solution, any solution. Could I overload the transmission? Could I somehow create a counter-frequency? The thought was ludicrous. This wasn't radio waves. This was something that operated on a level that made physics a child's game. The pulsing image on the screen began to distort, to twist. The colors bled into each other, creating a nauseating swirl. The tearing sound reached a crescendo, a shriek that seemed to tear through my very soul. I squeezed my eyes shut, hands clamped over my ears, but the sound was inside me. When I forced my eyes open, the screen was no longer displaying a pulsing image. It was blank, utterly terrifyingly blank. The humming of the bunker had ceased. The lights were out, but it wasn't empty. I could feel it. It was no longer on the screen. It was here in me. What had I done? Had I opened the door? Or had I simply witnessed its inevitable arrival? The hum of the climate control was a low, persistent thrum against my eardrums. It was the only sound in the Cold War bunker. Occupants vanished. Recordings remain, besides my own ragged breaths. The air itself felt heavy, thick with the dust of decades, and something else. Something acrid and lingering, like ozone after a lightning strike, but without the clean scent of rain. It clung to my tongue, a taste of metallic dread. I ran a gloved hand over the console, the smooth, cool plastic a stark contrast to the frantic, greasy sweat that had coated my palms just moments before. The screens, once a chaotic dance of corrupted data and flickering static, now displayed a single, stark message in a stark, blocky font: signal analysis complete. No further transmissions detected. No further transmissions. It was a lie, of course, a cruel, deliberate lie. The silence was the loudest thing in this mausoleum of forgotten purpose. I could still feel the phantom pressure in my skull, the echo of that impossible frequency that had clawed at the edges of my sanity. It had receded. Yes, but the absence was a gaping wound. My eyes traced the lines of the bunker walls, the utilitarian gray concrete streaked with water stains that looked disturbingly like dried blood. Into nothing, and then the signal, my desperate, foolish attempt to understand, to control. I had amplified it, a moment of hubris, of blinding curiosity overriding every shred of caution. I had thought I could harness it, dissect it, understand the impossible geometry of its origin. Instead, I had merely invited it, or perhaps confirmed its existence. The recordings. I forced myself to look at the playback unit, the small, unassuming device that had catalogued the end of everything for the people who had built this place. The tape had finished its cycle, the reel now still. A faint, rhythmic clicking began to emanate from one of the ventilation shafts. Click, click, click. It was slow, deliberate, almost conversational. My muscles tensed. It was too regular to be natural, too patient. I strained my ears, trying to discern a pattern, a language, anything, but it was just that maddening, metronomic sound. It felt like it was measuring something, measuring me. My gaze fell on a discarded data slate near the main console. It lay face down. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, I snatched it up. My fingers fumbled with the edge, my heart racing. I flipped it over. The screen flickered to life, displaying a single, crudely drawn symbol. It was a spiral, but not a natural one. The lines twisted inward with an impossible, non-Euclidean grace. It made my eyes ache just to look at it, a dizzying sensation that threatened to pull me into its depths. Beneath the symbol, scrawled in what looked like dried ink, were 3 words: "IT remembers you." It remembered me. How? I had only just listened, or had I? The memory of the signal, of its insidious tendrils reaching into my mind, felt older than my own life. It felt like a forgotten dream, a primal fear I had somehow awakened. The clicking from the vent stopped. I held my breath, listening. The only sound was the frantic, desperate thumping of my own heart. Was it gone? Had my brief, foolish interaction with the signal simply confirmed its presence, and then it moved on? Or was it here, in the walls, in the very air I breathed? Waiting, the symbol on the slate seemed to pulse, an optical illusion born of my fear. What had I truly unleashed by acknowledging it? The dust motes danced in the single beam of my flashlight, each one a tiny, suspended universe in the oppressive stillness of the Cold War bunker. Occupants vanished, recordings remain. The acrid scent, sharp and metallic, pricked at the back of my throat, a constant reminder of the unseen. It was here, in this tomb of forgotten anxieties, that the last of the fragments pointed. The recordings, brittle and warped with age, whispered of a descent, not into madness, but into a horrifying clarity. I moved deeper, my boots crunching on something brittle, not glass. It felt organic, dry like ancient papyrus, but with a faint, unsettling resilience. I didn't dare to look too closely. The flashlight beam, a fragile thread against the encroaching black, swept over rusted consoles, their dials frozen in time. Testament to a panic that had long since evaporated, leaving only its phantom odor. The hum of the climate control, once a comforting constant, now felt like a labored breath, a dying pulse in the heart of this concrete mausoleum. The final recording was in a smaller chamber, sealed with a heavy steel door. The inscription above it was crudely etched, "The Source." My hand trembled as I reached for the wheel. It resisted, groaning like a wounded beast, then slowly, agonizingly, began to turn. It was a sound that bypassed my ears, resonating directly in my bones. The room was bare, save for a single pedestal in the center. On it, not a machine, not a device, but a thing. It was obsidian black, impossibly smooth, absorbing the light of my flashlight as if it were a hungry mouth. It was roughly spherical, but its contours seemed to shift, to writhe just at the edge of perception. No, not writhe, it was breathing. A slow, deliberate inhale and exhale that I felt more than heard. The recordings spoke of it, not as an object, but as a presence. They spoke of its origin not in this world, nor any world that my understanding of physics could encompass. A cosmic parasite waiting for what? For the right frequency, for the right invitation, the signal, my signal. I had found something, all right. I had found the listener, and it had answered. My breath hitched. The hum in my bones intensified. The obsidian sphere on the pedestal seemed to pulse now, a subtle expansion and contraction that mirrored the labored breathing I felt in my own chest. The acrid smell was stronger here, coppery and foul. It's not about understanding, Dean. It's about not understanding. The more I try, the more I open myself. The more I invite. I stumbled back, my flashlight beam dancing wildly. The walls of the bunker seemed to press in, the concrete groaning under an unseen weight. The sphere, it was larger now, or perhaps it was just the perception of it. The edges were blurring, losing their definition, bleeding into the air around it. The blackness was no longer just an absence of light. It was a palpable entity, a hunger. What was it? What did it want? What? Acceptance? Obsession? A terrible alien knowing. I could feel it reaching, not with tendrils or claws, but with a silent, pervasive pressure. It was probing my thoughts, my memories, the very structure of my consciousness. It was the vast, indifferent emptiness of space made manifest, a truth so profound and so terrifying that the human mind was not equipped to process it. To comprehend it fully would be to shatter. I clenched my fists, the dry, brittle fragments digging into my palms. I wouldn't shatter. I couldn't. I had to leave. I had to seal this place, bury this knowledge deeper than any bunker could contain. But how? How do you bury something that exists outside of space and time? The vibration in my bones had become a tremor. My vision swam. I could see the faint spectral outline of something within the blackness, a shape that defied geometry, a form that was both everywhere and nowhere. It was ancient, it was patient, and it was aware of me. I turned, my legs like lead, and fled. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind me, the clang echoing through the deserted corridors. I didn't stop to secure it, didn't dare to look back. The hum of the climate control was a distant, fading memory. All I could hear was the thrumming in my own body, a terrifying echo of the sphere's silent pulse. I reached the surface, gasping for air that felt thin and inadequate. The night sky was a familiar tapestry of stars, but now, each pinpoint of light seemed to hold a hidden menace. They were not distant suns, they were eyes. They were the scattered fragments of something far larger, far older, and far more terrible than I had ever conceived. I had found my anomaly. I had found the truth. And the truth was that we are not alone, and what shares this cosmos with us is not our kin, but a hunger that has always been and will always be. But the silence was gone. The hum was still there, a low, resonant frequency vibrating beneath my skin. It had heard me, it had seen me, it would always wait. And the question that gnawed at me, the question that would haunt my every waking moment, was not if it would return, but when. And what would it bring with it when it did?